on January 3rd, and I take that serious. And to put a specific blame on what happened today solely on our election is almost ridiculous. These flames, if you want to say, has been been fanned for the last 5 years. I mean, we've seen protests taking place. We saw what Antifa is capable of doing. We've seen cars get burned, and we've seen police be attacked before. We've seen doors be knocked in and windows and businesses burned to the ground and lives destroyed. This behavior is never acceptable. I don't care from which side it's coming from. It's never acceptable. And today it got out of line. We can debate as a country better than this. We are better than this. And at the end of the day, to try to point fingers on anybody, at the end of the day, we're responsible for our own actions. We make the decisions. And today a young lady lost her life because she went too far, and she went through a door that unfortunately I was nearby. And when she came through the door, an officer had to make a decision to put her down, and she lost her life. And guess what? That officer that discharged his weapon, probably for the first time, when you do that for the first time, your life is also altered. And so there's going to be a family mourning that lost a loved one, and then there's going to be a gentleman that is just doing his job that his life has changed too. There's a lot of officers that showed up to work today. I went down to the triage center where they had the police officers that had been injured during this mob that was storming the Capitol that was trying to protect us all, and that they have families to go home to, and their families love them just as much as my family does, but they're willing to stand in line. And all this talk that we've had in the past about defunding the police, well, let me tell you, they did their job today, and they did it strong. And I went down and I shook their hands, and I looked at them in the eyes, and some of those young men that were down there that hadn't seen this stuff before, and you could see it in their face. It had troubled them. You see other ones that's going to have scars the rest of their life that they didn't show up to work today on January 6th with it, but for the rest of their life they're going to remember what happened. And this is a dark day for all of us. And I hope as we move forward, as a country move forward on both sides of the aisle, we pay attention to what we're saying, and because words do matter. But I will go back and say this: we can debate better than this, but at the end of the day, you're responsible for your actions. Nobody else is to blame.
Representative Mullen, I know it's been a long day for you. I truly feel for you and every single elected member of Congress who had to experience that today. But I do want to just sort of get an answer on this. Are you going to continue to object the formalizing of the Electoral College vote, or have you moved beyond that? Do you still want to debate that Joe Biden did not win this election fair and square?
It's once again, when we start talking about my constitutional obligations, what happened today doesn't change that. My feelings doesn't change this. This isn't political for me. This is because I feel strong about what happened in a few states. I'm not trying to object to all the states. The few states that I feel like that they went around the state legislature and changed the election laws, which is outside the constitutional authority to do that. In Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, it's very clear on who has the authority to set when, where, and how the elections are handled, and that solely falls into the responsibility of the state legislators. And my objection, as I said earlier, would be the same if it was a Democrat, Republican, or a Democrat or Republican that was in the same boat. The Constitution has to be held true. It has to be held true because our democracy depends on that, and we have to do that. I'm obligated to do that. But as I said, we can hopefully change the tone of our debate. I hope when we go back in a session, once the perimeter here is secure and we're able to go back in, that we don't go in there and start pointing fingers. I was really disappointed on Jeffries a while ago because it sounded like we was already starting to point fingers. We shouldn't be doing that. We're leaders in our own right, and we need to be changing the tone of the debate among all of us and bring some type of sanity back to Congress.
Representative Mullen, we appreciate your time, and we will see how you and other members of Congress work this out tonight. We thank you again for your time. We're going to go to break, but before we do that, we do have some breaking news to report. Melania Trump, the First Lady's chief of staff, has just resigned. We'll have much more on that on the other side of this break.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know seems to change, well, like every day. So what is it that you really need to know, want to know, to help you not just get through your day, but make the most of it? Feel smarter, feel better, feel happier. Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon? GMA 3, what you need to know. It's all about you. Lunchtime at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC. This is going to be so good.
What you're seeing right now, this is part of the eye wall.
This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protest.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
Your mom said, comb your hair. Your dad told you, smarten up. Your dog is judging you right now. And your best friend just called you crazy. We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. Now, imagine getting your news like that. No bull, no spin, just give it to me straight. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. So if you like getting behind the biggest news stories of the day, inside all the details, the backstory, and what will happen next, then listen to Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
What kind of music do you want to make, Miss Franklin?
I want to make hits. I'm moving things forward for myself.
He's dragging you down.
You need me, Ree?
Hell, I do. Go get your respect.
The reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march. Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads, it's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown hate, the war among us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Streaming now on ABC News Live.
And welcome back, everyone, to our continuing coverage of this unprecedented and dark day in the nation's capital and in American history. In fact, joining us now is South Carolina Republican Representative Nancy Mace. Thank you so much for your time tonight on what has no doubt has been a harrowing day. Walk us through how this day has unfolded from your vantage point and how you've been feeling.
Yeah, this is an enormously sad day for our nation. I was in the chamber for the joint session of Congress that Vice President Mike Pence presided over. And on my way back to my office in the Cannon building when we recessed for the objectors to debate the Arizona Electoral College, the Cannon office building where I'm located was evacuated because there was a threat at the Republican headquarters. And we find out a few hours later that it was actually a pipe bomb that was delivered to Republican headquarters just a short distance from my office building. When we were able to go back to our offices after that, we were immediately put into a lockdown situation. We've not been able to come or go from our offices since that lockdown hours ago because of the violent protesters who stormed the Capitol building. Someone died tonight as a result of these protests, and I am trying to communicate to my colleagues in Congress that rhetoric has real consequences. And in fact, when I came up here this weekend with my children for my swearing in, I actually put them on the first plane home on Monday morning because I was worried about what might happen today because of the rhetoric that we've been hearing. And it has real legitimate consequences. Lives are at risk, and it's unacceptable. It's un-American. These are not protests. This is anarchy, and it needs to stop.
Representative Mace, Tom Yamas here from ABC News Live. What is your message going to be to your fellow Republicans who are going to continue to object and debate whether Joe Biden won the election?
They need to stop, and it needs to stop right now. I am discouraged when I hear my colleagues communicate that they are going to continue to object. Everyone in the chamber knows that this is a futile effort. Millions of people were misled to believe that President Trump could be president after today's vote on the Electoral College. Today's vote is just an administrative procedure. It's ceremonial. We can't overturn the election of 50 states who've certified their electors. We don't have that power or authority. Any member of Congress does. Millions of people were misled that the vice president could single-handedly overthrow the results of an election where 50 states certified that election. And Vice President Pence, God bless him, communicated that this morning, that just isn't the case. And I think that certain members of the fringe right in my party set expectations so high, that emotions ran so high, that they were willing to storm the Capitol violently, attacking the police, law enforcement. We're supposed to be the party that is the party of law and order. We're supposed to be protecting our police. And it's discouraging, it's saddening, it's disheartening. I'm heartbroken, but I'm angry too.
And just one more question for you. How much culpability do you feel that the president deserves for what has played out today?
Well, I said earlier today he needed to get off Twitter and get on the television and communicate peace to the American people. We need to have a timeout on the talk about voter fraud. I'm someone who supported the president. I believe there was fraud in the election. But the violence that we saw today, the lives that were put at risk, someone died tonight as a result of these protests. We needed to stop it. We need to end it. He needs to urge the American people to end this peacefully and to go home tonight. We need to get back to the business of Congress, and we need to do it in a peaceful and safe manner. I don't feel safe to go back to my hotel tonight. I'm probably not going back tonight. I'll probably stay, on my couch in the office tonight because it's not safe to be out there. I was out on the street yesterday evening to get dinner, and I was accosted. I was threatened online on social media. Someone wanted to shoot me last week. This isn't okay. The rhetoric has got to stop.
A congresswoman in this country who doesn't feel safe going back to her hotel tonight. Representative Mace, we thank you so much for your time. I'm glad that you're safe.
Thank you.
An act of domestic terrorism, that is what some are saying happened on Capitol Hill today. How did it happen? Who will be held accountable? And where do things go after today? Joining us now is someone who can help us try to make sense of all of this and the threat against our nation, former Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson. Secretary, thanks so much for joining us. What was your reaction as you saw these scenes play out at our nation's Capitol today? And are you surprised at how long it took to get control again of the Capitol?
Let me start with this. I have, over the last 4 years during the Trump presidency, tried to be a voice of reason. I can do so no longer. President Trump this past summer talked about invocation of the Insurrection Act. Today, we saw an act of insurrection by any definition of that word. And the person responsible for that is President Donald Trump. This is Trumpism boiling over, and President Trump lit the match. And he is responsible. And President Trump needs to understand that this will be the capstone of his legacy as President of the United States. In the wake of COVID, over 350,000 dead. The images we saw of looters, rioters, insurrectionists taking over the U.S. Capitol in the wake of a rally that he led will be his legacy. And he has to do much more than that taped interview and a few tweets to try to clean this up. He is the one that is responsible. And in the remaining days of his presidency, he needs to do much, much more. Think about the irony here. 4 years ago on the Western Front of the Capitol, this month, this president in his inaugural address talked about American carnage. And that's exactly what we saw today on the Western Front of the United States Capitol. And he is responsible for this. I am indeed surprised that these protesters were able to breach the U.S. Capitol as easily as they did. 4 years ago, I was responsible for the security of the inauguration. I've been responsible for the security of numerous national security events. We like to think of the Capitol as the people's house. There's no fence, but there could have been adequate security in place to prevent this from happening.
You've said many times in the statement just then that President Trump lit the match, that he is responsible. Should he be held accountable, and to what extent?
History will hold him accountable. The American people should hold him accountable for this. Let's not beat around the bush here. The overheated rhetoric of the last 4 years of the Trump presidency, coming from Donald Trump, brought this to today's boil. And this is his responsibility, and I know he cares about his legacy. And so he needs to realize this will be the capstone of his legacy.
Former Homeland Secretary, Security Secretary Jeh Johnson, we thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, Lindsay, with us now to break down this breach is former DHS Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism and Threat Prevention under President Trump, Elizabeth Newman. Elizabeth, were you shocked by what you saw today? And what were you thinking, knowing that you had worked for the president and witnessing his actions unfold today?
I was shocked. It was a sad day. It's a humiliating day for America. I never in my wildest dreams thought in our lifetime we would see basically domestic terrorists take over the Senate chamber and take photos. I'm glad they didn't do more damage, but what they purported to do put a number of lives at risk. Somebody lost their life. There are others that are injured, and they need to be held accountable for it. But let's be honest. I think Secretary Johnson was being almost gracious. It's not just heated rhetoric, it's lies. It's 4 years of lies. And it is absolutely at the responsibility of the president, but it's also the responsibility of many of the enablers of the presidents who have covered up for him, senior leaders who have tried to protect the public from his true nature. It is the conservative infotainment echo chamber that perpetuates and continues those lies to the point where you now have half the country believing that there was a systemic, massive fraud perpetrated on this election. And the danger there, which many of us in the counterterrorism community have been warning about, we already had a growing threat from domestic terrorists, from violent white supremacists, from violent anti-government extremists. And what he has done is amplified their causes and encouraged people to join those causes. And by creating this narrative that an election has been stolen from you, the people, it is added to the ranks and the numbers of people that now are extremist in their viewpoint. They feel that they are facing an existential threat to their country, to their livelihood. And when people face an existential threat, a small portion of those people tend towards violence. They turn to violent means to address their grievance. And the president has spent 4 years creating grievance through deception, through lies, and pouring fuel on the fire and inciting violence out of those grievances that he created.
Elizabeth, we have a hard break we have to hit. I only have 30 seconds left with you. Have you spoken to any of your former colleagues in the White House, and what are they saying?
I have not. Most of the colleagues I was working with have departed, and I think you're seeing the effects of that at this point.
Elizabeth Newman, we thank you for your time as well. We also want to wrap up some developing news that we are following. Mitch McConnell, the majority leader right now, that's obviously going to change with what's happened in the Georgia Senate races, but he is set to address his chamber at 8 o'clock. We will bring you those comments live. We also want to report Stephanie Grisham, who is the chief of staff to First Lady Melania Trump, has resigned amid these protests. She was one of the most loyal Trump staffers, going from the campaign to then working for the First Lady, and she has resigned. Just some of the first fallout that we've seen from the events that have unfolded tonight. Lindsay, we're going to continue to follow this ongoing story. We're going to have a special report starting at 8 o'clock as well, but it has been incredible and unbelievable what we've witnessed over the hours today.
It's just hard to fathom and remains that way. Our coverage continues in just a moment.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source, ABC News. Wow. Breaking news, live events as they happen, streaming live, non-stop, straight to you. Original, on the edge, breakthrough storytelling. From ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want, free. And imagine the most celebrated, epic live events and moments, all playing out right before your eyes.
See those flames behind me?
And go deeper inside the groundbreaking exclusives from the campaign trail only ABC News gets. Watch ABC News Live right now and anytime. Streaming on Roku, Hulu.
Conspiracy theory by the left. That's just a fact. And there was no objection to that by the Republican Party. Now you're in the tail end of Donald Trump as president, and we don't know what's going to happen to him in the future. I agree with one thing that John said, which is, a motion like a censure motion would certainly be appropriate at a minimum in both the House and the Senate. It would be wonderful if Speaker Pelosi and Leader McConnell could get together tonight even and agree on something that they would both be willing to bring to the floor of the House. It wouldn't be enough for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and it would be too much for the conservative wing of the Republican Party or the Trump wing of the Republican Party. But it would be important to take some step. But I do need to disagree with something that John has been saying throughout the evening and that others have tried to say, which is there's sort of an attempt to continue the line that both sides do this. And I really think that that is one of the problems that we have in American politics is there are times when one group of people have gone too far and both sides are not doing this. You had, as I said earlier, I don't know what the number was. Was it 1 million people who came to the Women's March in Washington? They didn't attack the Capitol. They hated the fact that Donald Trump was elected president. They didn't commit violence. They didn't attack the Capitol. They didn't attack the White House. They spoke out and they committed themselves to winning the next election. And they didn't even say that the election was stolen. It's a myth that Democrats have spent the last 4 years saying that the election was stolen. What they have said is that the president colluded with Russia over the election. It was proven that he did. It was proven just recently that he asked a foreign country to intervene in this election, and then he was acquitted by the Senate. I do think we need to come together, but I don't believe that it's helpful to always say that both sides do it. When Vice President Joe Biden had to oversee the election count, the certification, 4 years ago, I believe it was something to the effect of, to his own members, didn't he say, "It's over, guys. Stop objecting. The election's over." This is something that Donald Trump has said.
That's right. And Danny Weiss, in terms of tonight and whether these objections go forward, do you think, I'm asking you to speculate right now, but do you have either any information or do you have expectation that we will continue to see these arguments play out as there are objections to, we're finishing up on Arizona, we haven't heard the conclusion of that, but then Georgia and Pennsylvania?
I don't know the answer. I've been texting with members of Congress and staff during this break, and the Democratic members that I've spoken with obviously hope that the Republican members will withdraw their objections. They don't know what's going to happen, though, and that's even from some members that are very close with Republicans. When you look back at the proceedings, I'll just say really quickly, this has been accomplished. The certification of the ballots can be done in about 25 minutes. We were expecting it to take about maybe 18 hours today if they did all 6 states. Now it's obviously taking much longer than that with this horrific interruption. But this whole process could have taken 25 minutes, and then you can get back to dealing with the COVID crisis, dealing with vaccines, and preparing, frankly, for a new Congress and a new administration.
Danny Weiss, John Hart, joining us all afternoon and into the evening to help us understand and to dissect what's been going on in this electoral count process. Thank you both. And as I thank you, I want to tell our audience it is now 8 p.m. on the East Coast. We are continuing our live special coverage on PBS of this remarkable and disturbing day. We thought we would witness a peaceful transition of power, including some legislative debate as lawmakers counted the legally certified votes by all 50 states to confirm, and the District of Columbia, to confirm Joe Biden to be the next president. Instead, President Trump spoke to protesters for more than an hour. He repeated false claims that he won the election. Shortly thereafter, Republican lawmakers contested the vote in the state of Arizona. Moments later, a mob supported and encouraged by President Trump stormed the Capitol. They overran Capitol Police. Violence ensued. Shots were fired. And at this moment, we can report that at least one woman was killed. We don't know the details of that tragedy. Our Lisa Desjardins has been there at the Capitol all day. Yamiche Alcindor is at the White House. And I come to the two of you as we still are absorbing the shock and dismay and alarm at all we've witnessed today. Lisa, you went to the Capitol this morning thinking you were going to cover, as I've just mentioned, an accounting of electoral votes. You knew there were going to be some objections, but you thought it was all going to reach a conclusion at some point late tonight. But that's not exactly what happened.
That isn't what happened. I am glad to say that it does look like I will get the chance to cover that electoral process. We have just been monitoring senators and House members who are planning to object. One of them, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. He is the Senate Homeland Security Chairman currently. He is an objector. He just told reporters here at the Capitol, who passed on along their notes to me, that obviously, his quote is, obviously, given what has happened, attitudes are changing. Clearly, at least some objectors are thinking of removing their objections, and I think the place to watch is the U.S. Senate. That's one reason that we were going to see 3 states versus 6. Senators were less embracing of sort of a full throttle, object to everything approach. Now we will have to watch to see if senators object to any states at all. Seems like it is clearly under consideration. But one other piece of big news, especially for myself personally, you may have noticed, I am back in the U.S. Capitol. I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time when the staff of the House Radio TV Gallery was escorted back with some other journalists. I was able to be escorted back with them. That is a very positive sign. Capitol Police feels the building is secure enough for some of us to be here and work here. However, my understanding from what I saw, it is on an escort-only basis. I don't think I'm able to leave this area. I don't feel like I need to at this point. But it is a very positive sign. I personally am very relieved. It's good to be back where I can plug in my phone.
We are very glad about that, too. And I should say, Lisa, extraordinary reporting you did today. All walking with your camera all over the U.S. Capitol to the underground tunnel that leads from the Capitol to various office buildings the members used. Quite an extraordinary performance. It's been noticed by a lot of people, and we can't thank you enough. Before I go to Yamiche, though, I just want to clarify. So you're saying it sounds like there may not be any Senate objections, or we're not sure yet?
Let me be clear. We're not sure. We know that senators who were planning to object seem to be reconsidering their plan. We don't know how far that goes. Does that mean they will object to fewer states, to no states? Will fewer senators themselves join the objection? It only takes one senator. So we're talking about 12 senators who all would have to remove their objections. But we should watch that. It doesn't seem impossible to me, but I honestly don't know how that will end. One of them, Ron Johnson, who is one of the most ardent supporters of the president, unapologetic he has been about the objection movement, is now saying that there's a different attitude because of what has happened.
Well, that may very well be a telling comment. So We will hang on that, remember that, until we learn more, and we'll come back to you as the hour goes on. Lisa Desjardins, thank you. And now to Yamiche Alcindor at the White House. Yamiche, the president had an active hour or more speaking to his supporters, and everything fell apart after that. They marched to the Capitol. They assaulted the Capitol. People were hurt. A woman was killed. Where do things stand tonight?
Judy, remarkably and in some ways troubling, in a troubling way, President Trump remains defiant, remains wedded to the idea that he is the rightful winner of the 2020 election. I was just talking to someone who is familiar with some of the conversations that the president has been having as he's been watching all this unfold from the White House on TV. And that person said that the president is genuinely embarrassed, genuinely worried about trying at all to say that he is not the winner of this election. And as a result, there are some people who feel like the president has simply just lost his way. There are people telling me that the president has often walked up to the line, but then walked back right after, walked up to not wanting to denounce white supremacists, and then at some point being able to denounce them. Now the president is, I'm told, confused because he doesn't want to denounce these people too forcefully because they are, in fact, these violent protesters as they breach security and are, in some cases, arrested. They are doing what the president told them to do. He stood in front of hundreds of people today and said, fight and march to the Capitol. And that's exactly what those people did. So the president now is in a situation where he wants to be able to denounce violence and wants to make sure that the Capitol isn't run over entirely, but he also wants to keep these same people as his supporters. The thing that also is happening tonight is that you're seeing the tensions that are
Yamiche, I'm going to interrupt you. Yamiche, I'm going to interrupt you because we have Vice President Pence sitting in the seat at the U.S. Senate. Let's listen to him.
Suffered by those who defended our Capitol today. And we will always be grateful to the men and women who stayed at their posts to defend this historic place. To those who wreaked havoc in our Capitol today, you did not win. Violence never wins. Freedom wins. And this is still the people's house. And as we reconvene in this chamber, the world will again witness the resilience and strength of our democracy. For even in the wake of unprecedented violence and vandalism at this Capitol, the elected representatives of the people of the United States have assembled again on the very same day to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So may God bless the lost, the injured, and the heroes forged on this day. May God bless all who serve here and those who protect this place. And may God bless the United States of America. Let's get back to work.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the Majority Leader and the Democratic Leader be allowed to speak and that the time not count against 2 hours of debate in relation to the objection raised on the state of Arizona.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
I want to say to the American people, the United States Senate will not be intimidated. We will not be kept out of this chamber by thugs, mobs, or threats. We will not bow to lawlessness or intimidation. We are back at our posts. We will discharge our duty under the Constitution and for our nation. And we're going to do it tonight. This afternoon, Congress began the process of honoring the will of the American people and counting the Electoral College votes. We've fulfilled this solemn duty every 4 years for more than 2 centuries. Whether our nation's been at war or at peace, under all manner of threats, even during an ongoing armed rebellion and the Civil War, the clockwork of our democracy has carried on. The United States and the United States Congress have faced down much greater threats than the unhinged crowd we saw today. We've never been deterred before and will be not deterred today. They tried to disrupt our democracy. They failed. They failed. They failed to attempt to obstruct the Congress. This failed insurrection for us is for our republic. Our nation was founded precisely so that the free choice of the American people is what shapes our self-government and determines the destiny of our nation. Not fear, not force. But the peaceful expression of the popular will. Now, we assembled this afternoon to count our citizens' votes and to formalize their choice of the next president. Now we're going to finish exactly what we started. We'll complete the process the right way, by the book. We'll follow our precedents, our laws, and our Constitution to the letter. And we will certify the winner of the 2020 presidential election. Criminal behavior will never dominate the United States Congress. This institution is resilient. Our democratic republic is strong. The American people deserve nothing less.
Democratic leader.
Mr. President. Mr. President, it is very, very difficult to put into words what has transpired today. I have never lived through or even imagined an experience like the one we have just witnessed in this Capitol. President Franklin Roosevelt set aside December 7th, 1941, as a day that will live in infamy. Unfortunately, we can now add January 6th, 2021, to that very short list of dates in American history that will live forever in infamy. This temple to democracy was desecrated. Its windows smashed, our offices vandalized. The world saw Americans' elected officials hurriedly ushered out because they were in harm's way. The House and Senate floors were places of shelter until the evacuation was ordered, leaving rioters to stalk these hallowed halls. Lawmakers and our staffs, average citizens who love their country, serve it every day, feared for their lives. I understand that one woman was shot and tragically lost her life. We mourn her and feel for her friends and family. These images were projected to the world. Foreign embassies cabled home their home capitals to report the harrowing scenes at the very heart of our democracy. This will be a stain on our country, not so easily washed away. The final, terrible, indelible legacy of the 45th President of the United States, undoubtedly our worst. I want to be very clear. Those who perform these reprehensible acts cannot be called protesters. No, these were rioters and insurrectionists, goons and thugs, domestic terrorists. They do not represent America. They were a few thousand violent extremists who tried to take over the Capitol building and attack our democracy. They must and should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, hopefully by this administration, if not, certainly by the next. They should be provided no leniency. I want to thank the many of the Capitol Hill Police and Secret Service and local police who kept us safe today and worked to clear the Capitol and return it to its rightful owners and its rightful purpose. I want to thank the leaders, Democrat and Republican, House and Senate. It was Speaker Pelosi, Leader McConnell, Leader McCarthy, and myself who came together and decided that these thugs would not succeed, that we would finish the work of that our Constitution requires us to complete in the very legislative chambers of the House and Senate that were desecrated, but we know always belong to the people and do again tonight. But make no mistake, my friends, today's events did not happen spontaneously. The president who promoted conspiracy theories that motivated these thugs, the president who exhorted them to come to our nation's capital, egged them on. He hardly ever discourages violence and more often encourages it. This president bears a great deal of the blame. This mob was in good part President Trump's doing, incited by his words, his lies. This violence, in good part, his responsibility, his everlasting shame. Today's events certainly would not have happened without him. Now, January 6th will go down as one of the darkest days in recent American history. A final warning to our nation about the consequences of a demagogic president, the people who enable him, the captive media that parrots his lies, and the people who follow him as he attempts to push America to the brink of ruin. As we reconvene tonight, let us remember, in the end, all this mob has really accomplished is to delay our work by a few hours. We will resume our responsibilities now, and we will finish our task tonight. The House and Senate chambers will be restored good as new and ready for legislating in short order. The counting of the electoral votes is our sacred duty. Democracy's roots in this nation are deep, they're strong, and they will not be undone, ever, by a group of thugs. Democracy will triumph, as it has for centuries. So to my fellow Americans who were shocked and appalled by the images on their televisions today and who are worried about the future of this country, let me speak to you directly. The divisions in our country clearly run deep, but we are a resilient, forward-looking, and optimistic people, and we will begin the hard work of repairing this nation tonight, because here in America, we do hard things. In America, we always overcome our challenges. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I yield 2 minutes to the senator from Oklahoma, Senator Lankford.
Senator from Oklahoma.
The Vice President, you said things more eloquently than how we say it in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, we'd say something like, why in God's name would someone think attacking law enforcement and occupying the United States Capitol is the best way to show that you're right? Why would you do that? Rioters and thugs don't run the Capitol. We're the United States of America. We disagree on a lot of things, and we have a lot of spirited debate in this room. But we talk it out, and we honor each other, even in our disagreement. That person is not my enemy. That's my fellow American. And while we disagree on things and disagree strongly at times, we do not encourage what happened today, ever. Now, I want to join my fellow senators in saying thank you to the Capitol Hill Police, the law enforcement, the National Guard, the Secret Service, who stood in harm's way. While we were here debating, they were pushing back. And I was literally interrupted mid-sentence speaking here because we were all unaware of what was happening right outside this room because of their faithfulness and because of what they have done. And I want to thank them. Ronald Reagan once said, "Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means." The peaceful people in my state in Oklahoma want their questions answered, but they don't want what happened today. They want to do the right thing, and they also want to do it the right way. They want to honor the constitutional process, but they also want to have debate about election security because they want to make sure it's right, which is why it's an important issue that still needs to be resolved. Transparency in government just doesn't seem like a bad idea. Obviously, the commission that we have asked for is not going to happen at this point, and I understand that. And we're headed towards tonight, towards the certification of Joe Biden to be the President of the United States. And we will work together in this body to be able to set a peaceful example for the days ahead. I yield the floor.
Democratic leader.
Senator from Nevada, Senator Cortez Masto.
Senator from Nevada.
Mr. Vice President, I know that this room is full of leaders of both parties who love this country, and many believe that for America to succeed, our politics must find common ground. And that has never been clearer than today, when armed rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol, emboldened by President Trump's false and inflammatory rhetoric about the 2020 elections. I believe that we in this chamber have a special duty as leaders to work together to lower the temperature of our politics. And I hope that my colleagues who have questioned the legitimacy of this election in Arizona and all of these other states now see the dire and dangerous consequences of sowing doubt and uncertainty. I also know that as U.S. senators, we all take solemnly the oath we swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. At this moment in history, I can think of nothing more patriotic than renewing our faith in the charters of freedom that our founding fathers crafted for our republic, starting with the fundamental American principle in our Declaration of Independence that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. The people have spoken in this election, and our only job here today is to do what they ask. It is not to argue election security. That's not the place for what we are doing today. Our Constitution specifically reserves to the people the right to meet in their respective states and vote for the president and vice president. As a result, individual states oversee and implement the election process, not the federal government. To guard against fraud or irregularities in the voting process, the states are required to have robust election security measures. Likewise, state legislatures have the opportunity to examine evidence of voter fraud before they certified their electoral college votes. And our courts, from district courts to the United States Supreme Court, adjudicate legal challenges and election disputes. All of those things happened after the 2020 election. State houses and courts across the country took allegations of voter fraud seriously and followed the constitutional process to hear challenges to this year's elections. No state found evidence of any widespread voter fraud, and neither did any court ask to review the state's findings. In Arizona, Republican Governor Doug Ducey, Democratic Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, Republican Attorney General Mark Brnovich, and State Supreme Court Chief Justice Robert Brutinel all certified the results of the election on November 30th. And we have heard, Arizonans have been voting by mail for almost 30 years. And Governor Ducey has expressed confidence in the state's process numerous times. In November, he said, "We do elections well here in Arizona. The system is strong, and that's why I have bragged on it so much." He further stated, "We have some of the strongest election laws in the country, laws that prioritize accountability and clearly lay out our procedures for conducting, canvassing, and even contesting the results." And they are right. Arizona has one of the most transparent election processes in the country, with built-in accountability, starting with internal auditing. We have heard unfounded allegations that voting machines in Arizona and elsewhere somehow changed vote tallies or somehow improperly rejected ballots while claiming to accept them. These allegations all ignore the fact that Arizona counties conducted ballot audits by hand to double-check the machine counts, and these audits found no widespread fraud or irregularities. Maricopa County, the county where more than 60% of the state population resides, conducted a post-election hand count audit in the week after the election, which showed perfect 100% accuracy in the machine tabulations. So why would we need, my colleagues, to call for a 10-day emergency audit to be conducted by a legislative commission when it's already been done by the state of Arizona? What happened to states' rights? The audit involved checking ballots for the presidential election, but also ballots for federal and state legislative elections. The audit report shows every precinct's machine and hand count totals for each of the races audited. And for every single race in every precinct, the difference between the hand count and the machine count was 0. Maricopa's audit report stated no discrepancies were found by the hand count audit boards. Seeking to find any reason to contest these results, some of the state Republicans then tried to claim that Maricopa County failed to follow state law in conducting this audit by selecting voting center locations to audit instead of voting precincts. This was wrong. And this, too, went to a court. In rejecting this claim, state court in Arizona found that the county followed the properly issued guidance on hand audit procedures from the Arizona Secretary of State. And the court found that Maricopa County officials, therefore, could not lawfully have performed the hand count audit the way the plaintiffs wanted it done. If they had done so, they would have exposed themselves to criminal punishment.
The senator's 5 minutes is expired.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I would close by just saying, please, my colleagues, do not disenfranchise the voters of Arizona and certify their votes tonight. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the senator from Utah, Senator Lee.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, at the time I prepared my remarks for today, it seems like a lifetime ago. A lot's changed in the last few hours. And so I'm going to deliver some of the same remarks, but it has a little bit of a different feel than it would have just a few hours ago. My thoughts and prayers go out to the family members of those who have been injured or killed today. My heartfelt gratitude goes out to the Capitol Hill Police who valiantly defended our building and our lives. Well, it's true that legitimate concerns have been raised with regard to how some of the key battleground states conducted their presidential elections. This is not the end of the story. We each have to remember that we've sworn an oath to uphold, protect, and defend this document, written nearly 2.5 centuries ago by wise men raised up by God to that very purpose. That document makes clear what our role is and what it isn't. It makes clear who does what when it comes to deciding presidential elections. You see, because in our system of government, presidents are not directly elected. They're chosen by presidential electors. And the Constitution makes very clear under Article 2, Section 1, that the states shall appoint presidential electors according to procedures that their legislatures develop. Then comes the 12th Amendment. It explains what we're doing here today in the Capitol. It explains that the President of the Senate, the Vice President of the United States, shall open the ballots, and the votes shall then be counted. It's those words that confine, define, and constrain every scrap of authority that we have in this process. Our job is to open and then count. Open, then count. That's it. That's all there is. Now, there are, of course, rare instances in which multiple slates of electors can be submitted by the same state. That doesn't happen very often. It happened in 1960, it happened in 1876. Let's hope it doesn't ever happen again. In those rare moments, Congress has to make a choice. It has to decide which of the electoral votes will be counted and which will not. That did not happen here. Thank heavens, and let's hope that it never does. Now, many of my colleagues have raised objections or had previously stated their intent to raise objections with regard to these. I've spent an enormous time on this issue over the last few weeks. I've met with lawyers on both sides of the issue. I've met with lawyers representing the Trump campaign, reading everything I could find about the constitutional provisions in question. And I've spent a lot of time on the phone with legislators and other leaders from the contested states. I didn't initially declare my position because I didn't yet have one. I wanted to get the facts first, and I wanted to understand what was happening. I wanted to give the people serving in government in the contested states the opportunity to do whatever they felt they needed to do to make sure that their election was properly reflected. I spent an enormous amount of time reaching out to state government officials in those states, but in none of the contested states, no, not even one, did I discover any indication that there was any chance that any state legislature or secretary of state or governor or lieutenant governor had any intention to alter the slate of electors. That being the case, our job is a very simple one. This simply isn't how our federal system is supposed to work. That is to say, if you have concerns with the way that an election in the presidential race was handled in your state, the appropriate response is to approach your state legislatures, first and foremost. These protests, from hearing from those who have raised concerns, they should have been focused on their state capitals, not their nation's capital. Because our role is narrow, our role is defined, our role is limited. Yes, we are the election judges when it comes to members elected to our own body. And yes, the House of Representatives, they're the judges of their own races there. We also have the authority to prescribe, as a Congress, rules governing the time, place, and manner of elections for senators and representatives. There is no corresponding authority with respect to presidential elections. None whatsoever. It doesn't exist. Our job is to convene, to open the ballots, and to count them. That's it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Democratic leader.
Senator from Colorado, Mr. Bennett.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, it's been a terrible day for everybody here and for our country. One of the things I was thinking about today is something I often think about when I'm on this floor, which is that the founders of this country, the people that wrote our Constitution, actually knew our history better than we know our history. And I was thinking about that history today as we saw the mob riot in Washington, D.C., thinking about what the founders were thinking about when they wrote our Constitution, which was what happened to the Roman Republic when armed gangs doing the work for politicians prevented Rome from casting their ballots for consuls, for praetors, for senators. These were the offices in Rome. And these armed gangs ran through the streets of Rome, keeping elections from being started, keeping elections from ever being called. And in the end, because of that, the Roman Republic fell and a dictator took its place. And that was the end of the Roman Republic, or any republic for that matter, until this beautiful Constitution was written in the United States of America. So it is my fervent hope that the way that we respond to this today, my dear colleagues, is that we give the biggest bipartisan vote we can in support of our democracy and in support of our Constitution and in rejection for what we saw today and what the Roman Republic saw in its own time. There's a tendency around this place, I think, to always believe that we're the first people to confront something when that's seldom the case, and to underappreciate what the effect of our actions will be. We need to deeply appreciate in this moment our obligation to the Constitution, our obligation to the democracy, our obligation to the Republic. There are people in this chamber that have twisted the words of a statute written in the 19th century that was meant to actually settle our electoral disputes, to leave them with the states. As the senator from Utah was saying, to give us a ministerial role, except in very rare circumstances. That's what that law is about, that the senator of Texas was talking about today. And that's the law that's leading us to be asked to overturn the judgments of 60 courts in America, many of them courts in Arizona, some of whom have howled the president's lawyers out of the courtrooms because there's no evidence of fraud. And by the way, the fact that 37% or 39% of Americans think there's no evidence of fraud or think there's evidence of fraud does not mean there is fraud. If you turned a blind eye to a conspiracy theory, you can't now come to the floor of the Senate and say you're ignoring the people who believe the election was stolen. Go out there and tell them the truth, which is that every single member of this Senate knows this election wasn't stolen. And that we, just as in the Roman Republic, have a responsibility to protect the independence of the judiciary from politicians who will stop at nothing to hold on to power. There's nothing new about that either. That's been true since the First Republic was founded. So now we find ourselves in a position just days after many senators here swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. Every single member of the House of Representatives swore the same oath as well. And I think we've got a solemn obligation and responsibility here to prove once again that this country is a nation of laws and not of men. And the only result that we can reach together is one that rejects the claim of the senator from Texas and the other members of the House and Senate who seek to overturn the decisions that are made by the states, by the voters in the states, and by the courts. If we follow what they have proposed, we will be the ones that will have disenfranchised every single person who cast a vote in this election, whether they voted for the president or they didn't. I urge you to reject this, and I deeply appreciate the opportunity to serve with every single one of you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I yield up to 5 minutes to the senator from Georgia, Senator Loeffler.
Senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, when I arrived in Washington this morning, I fully intended to object to the certification of the electoral votes. However, the events that have transpired today have forced me to reconsider, and I cannot now in good conscience object to the certification of these electors. The violence, the lawlessness, and siege of the halls of Congress are abhorrent and stand as a direct attack on the very institution my objection was intended to protect, the sanctity of the American democratic process. And I thank law enforcement for keeping us safe. I believe that there were last-minute changes to the November 2020 election process and serious irregularities that resulted in too many Americans losing confidence not only in the integrity of our elections, but in the power of the ballot as a tool of democracy. Too many Americans are frustrated at what they see as an unfair system. Nevertheless, there is no excuse for the events that took place in these chambers today, and I pray that America never suffers such a dark day again. Though the fate of this vote is clear, the future of the American people's faith in the core institution of this democracy remains uncertain. We as a body must turn our focus to protecting the integrity of our elections and restoring every American's faith that their voice and their vote matters. America is a divided country with serious differences, but it is still the greatest country on earth. There can be no disagreement that upholding democracy is the only path to preserving our republic. I yield the floor.
Democratic Leader.
Minutes to Senator Booker and 2.5 minutes to Senator Kaine. In reverse order.
Mr. President and my colleagues.
Senator from Virginia.
I applaud the comments of my colleague from Georgia deeply. My first job after school was in Macon, Georgia, working for a federal judge, Lanier Anderson. And I learned a lot about integrity and a lot about law from him. I also learned some sad lessons that in the history of Georgia, and indeed Virginia and many states, so many people, especially people of color, have been disenfranchised over the course of our history. Our late friend, John Lewis, congressman from Georgia, was savagely beaten on Bloody Sunday just for marching for voting rights. That act of violence inspired this body, the U.S. Senate, to come together in March of 1965 and work to pass, in a bipartisan fashion, the Voting Rights Act. We should be coming together today after acts of violence as a United States Senate to affirm the votes of all who cast ballots in November. Instead, we're contemplating an unprecedented objection that would be a massive disenfranchisement of American voters. The Georgia result was very clear, a 12,000 vote margin, 2 certifications by Republican officials, 4 separate recounts and canvasses, 7 lawsuits, as in the other states. If we object to results like this, the message is so clear. We are saying to states, no matter how secure and accurate your elections are, we'll gladly overthrow them if we don't like who you voted for. But more importantly, what we'll be saying, really what we'll be doing, is as the body that acted together to guarantee Americans the right to vote, we will become the agent of one of the most massive disenfranchisements in the history of this country. So I urge all of my colleagues, please oppose these objections. Thank you, and I yield to my colleague from New Jersey.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. Vice President, I can only think of 2 times in American history that individuals laid siege to our Capitol, stormed our sacred civic spaces, and tried to upend and overrun this government. One was in the War of 1812, and the other one was today. What's interesting about the parallel between the two is they both were waving flags to a sole sovereign, to an individual, surrendering democratic principles to the cult of personality. One was a monarch in England, and the other were the flags I saw all over our Capitol, including in the hallways and in this room, to a single person named Donald Trump. The sad difference between these 2 times is one was yet another nation in the history of our country that tried to challenge the United States of America. But this time, we brought this hell upon ourselves. My colleague from Texas said that this was a moment where there were unprecedented allegations of voter fraud. Yes, that is true. They were unprecedented when the president, before the election even happened, said, if I lose this election, then the election was rigged. That's unprecedented. It's unprecedented before the night of the voting, even the counting of the vote was even done, that he called it rigged. And it's unprecedented that he is fanning the flames of conspiracy theory to create a smokescreen in this nation, to cover what he is trying to do, which is undermine our democratic principles. But it's not just that. The shame of this day is it's being aided and abetted by good Americans who are falling prey, who are choosing Trump over truth, who are surrendering to the passion of lies as opposed to standing up and speaking truth to power, who are trying to fundraise off of the shame of conspiracy theories as opposed to doing the incalculably valuable, patriotic thing to speak truth to our nation. Our democracy is wounded, and I saw it when I saw pictures of yet another insurgency, of a flag of another group of Americans who tried to challenge our nation. I saw the flag of the Confederacy there. What will we do? How will we confront this shame? How will we confront this dark second time in American history? I pray that we remember a Georgian. And his words, all I can say is we must in spirit join together like those Georgians on a bridge called the Edmund Pettus, who joined hands, who were called threats to our democracy, who were called outrageous epithets when they sought to expand our democracy, to save it and to heal it, when they joined arm in arm and said what we should say now, commit ourselves to that ideal, that together we shall overcome.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from Nebraska, Senator Sass.
Senator from Nebraska.
Mr. President, thank you. And Mr. Vice President, let me just say before I begin, thank you for the way you have fulfilled your constitutional duties and your oath of office today. It obviously hasn't been easy. Colleagues, today has been ugly. And when I came to the floor this morning, I planned to talk about the lesson of 1801, because I'm kind of a history nerd. And I wanted to celebrate the glories of the peaceful transition of power across our nation's history. It feels a little naive now to talk about ways that American civics might be something that could unite us and bring us back together. 1801 blew everybody's mind all over the world, by the way. John Adams loses to Thomas Jefferson, and Adams willingly leaves the executive mansion and moves back to Massachusetts, and Jefferson peacefully assumes power. And people all over Europe said, that must be fake news. Those must be bad reports. There's no way any executive would ever willingly lay down power. And yet Adams, in defeat, did something glorious to give all of us a gift. I wanted to celebrate that, and it feels a little bit harder now. This building has been desecrated. Blood has been spilled in the hallways. I was with octogenarian members of this chamber that needed to have troops and police stabilize them to get down the stairs at a time when a lot of our staffs were panicked and under their desks and not knowing what was going to happen to them. It was ugly today. But you know what? It turns out that when something's ugly, talking about beauty isn't just permissible. Talking about beauty is obligatory in a time like that. Why? Why would we talk about beauty after the ugliness of today? Because our kids need to know that this isn't what America is. What happened today isn't what America is. They've been given a glorious inheritance. This is the 59th presidential election. If the vice president wasn't the chair and if the president pro tem was, I'd have made some joke that Chuck Grassley has voted in 2/3 of those 59 presidential elections. He's laughing. It's not as good as Hit Dear, Dear Dead, but it's still got a Grassley laugh. I don't think we want to tell the Americans that come after us that this republic is broken, that this is just a banana republic, that our institutions can't be trusted. I don't think we want that. We don't want that in this body. We don't want that in our hometowns. I don't think we want to tell our kids that America's best days are behind us, because it's not true. That's not who we are. America isn't Hatfield's and McCoy's blood feud forever. America's a union. There's a lot that's broken in this country, but not anything that's so big that the American people can't rebuild it, that freedom and community and entrepreneurial effort and that neighborhoods can't rebuild. Nothing that's broken is so big that we can't fix it. Generations of our forefathers and our foremothers, probably not a word, our ancestors, have spilled blood to defend the glories of this republic. Why would they do that? Because America is the most exceptional nation in the history of the world, and because the Constitution is the greatest political document that's ever been written. Most governments in the past have said might makes right, and we saw some of that hooligan nuttery today. Might makes right. No, it doesn't. God gives us rights by nature, and government is just our shared project to secure those rights. America has always been about what we choose to do together, the way we reaffirm our constitutional system, where we've got some governmental tasks, and we all in this body could do better at those governmental tasks, but the heart of America is not government. The center of America is not Washington, D.C. The center of America is the neighborhoods where 330 million Americans are raising their kids and trying to put food on the table and trying to love their neighbor. That's the center of America. We're not supposed to be the most important people in America. We're supposed to be servant leaders who try to maintain a framework for ordered liberty so that there's a structure that back home where they live, they can get from the silver frame of structure and order to the golden apple at the center, as Washington would have said it, which is the things that they build together. The places where they coach Little League, the places where they invite people to synagogue or church. Sometimes the big things we do together are governmental, like kicking Hitler's ass or like going to the moon. Sometimes there is governmental stuff, but the heart of America is about places where moms and dads are raising kids, and we're supposed to serve them by maintaining order and by rejecting violence. You can't do big things like that if you hate your neighbors. You can't do big things together as Americans if you think other Americans are the enemy. Look, there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. I get it. There's a lot that does need to be rebuilt. But if you're angry, I want to beg you, don't let the screamers who monetize hate have the final word. Don't let nihilists become your drug dealers. There are some who want to burn it all down. We met some of them today, but they aren't going to win. Don't let them be your prophets. Instead, organize, persuade, but most importantly, love your neighbor. Visit the widower down the street who's lonely and doesn't want to tell anybody that his wife died and he doesn't have a lot of friends. Shovel somebody's neighbor, or shovel somebody's driveway. You can't hate somebody who just shoveled your driveway. The heart of life is about community and neighborhood, and we're supposed to be servant leaders. The constitutional system is still the greatest order for any government ever, and it's our job to steward it and protect it. Let's remember that today when we vote.
Democratic leader.
Senator Durbin.
Senator from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. In March of 1861, a Springfield lawyer caught a train to Washington. His name was Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't his first trip here. He'd served as a congressman 15 years before, and he returned in the beginning of the Civil War to serve as president. It was a different place than he knew it as congressman. In 15 years, it had changed a lot. The Spriggs boarding house across the street, which is now the Library of Congress, was gone. And this building was changing. Big changes. They're building a dome on the Capitol. But they were also in the earliest days of a war, and President Lincoln was counseled, stop building the dome. It costs too much money, and we can't spend any more time on it. And he said, no, we're going to build that dome and we're going to finish it. That dome and this building will be a symbol of this country that will survive this Civil War and come back strong. So they built the dome, they won the war, and since those days, that dome and this building have been a symbol to this country, a symbol of unity and of hope. Tourists come through here before COVID-19 by the tens of thousands. And if you've ever noticed their tours, they're often shushed. People are saying, show some respect for this building. We know this building in the rotunda as a place where some of the greatest American heroes of both political parties lie in state, and we go there to honor them. We know this building because we work here. We enact laws here that change America. We gather for State of the Union messages from presidents and honor the people in the gallery. This is a special place. This is a sacred place. But this sacred place was desecrated by a mob today on our watch. This temple to democracy was defiled by thugs who roam the halls and sat in that chair, Mr. Vice President, the one that you vacated at 2:15 this afternoon, sat and posed for pictures, those who were roaming around this chamber. What brought this on? Did this mob spring spontaneously from America? No. This mob was invited to come to Washington on this day by this president for one reason, because he knew the Electoral College vote was going to be counted this day. He wanted this mob to disrupt the constitutional process which we are part of. This mob was inspired by a president who cannot accept defeat. If you wonder whether I'm going too far in what I say, just read the transcript with the Secretary of State from Georgia and listen to this president's wild conspiracy theories, one after the other, swatted down by that Republican elected official and his attorney as having no basis in fact. This president begs, he coaxes, he even threatens that Secretary of State to find the votes he needs. In any other venue, that would be a simple, obvious crime. The lengths he will go to are obvious. The Texas senator says to us, well, many people still agree with him, you know, when it gets down to the bottom line. Many people have fallen for this presidential position that it must have been a rigged election if I lost. Well, I would say that after we've lost count, 57 lawsuits, 62 lawsuits, I've heard so many numbers, after 90 different judges, after this president took his case, the best he could put together, to the highest court in the land across the street, where he has personally chosen 3 justices on the Supreme Court, I say to the senator from Texas, you know much more about that court than I do. I don't believe they let that paper that he sent up there even hit the desk before they laughed it out of the court. And that's the best he had to offer. No evidence whatsoever of this rigged election and this fraudulence. The senator from Texas says, we just want to create a little commission. 10 days, we're going to audit all the states, particularly the ones in contention here. and find out what actually occurred. And it really draws its parallel in 1876, Hayes and Tilden. Don't forget what that commission, that so-called political compromise, achieved. It was not just some ordinary governmental commission. It was a commission that killed Reconstruction, that established Jim Crow, that even after a civil war which tore this nation apart, it re-enslaved African Americans. And it was a commission that invited the voter suppression we are still fighting today in America. Let me close by saying this. The vote we're going to have here is a clear choice of whether we are going to feed the beast of ignorance or we are going to tell the truth to the American people. We saw that beast today roaming the halls. Let's not invite it back.
Majority Leader.
President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from Kansas, Senator Marshall.
Senator from Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Freedom of speech.
It is now 9 p.m. on the East Coast, and this has been a tragic and historic day in the United States. As lawmakers gather to count the votes to ensure a peaceful transition of power, President Trump riled up his supporters for more than an hour, and then a mob swarmed the U.S. Capitol, moments after Republican lawmakers began challenging the vote in Arizona. It was a violent takeover. The mob broke in past Capitol Police. Sadly, we know at least one woman was shot and killed in the halls that are meant to symbolize our democracy. Our Lisa Desjardins is at the Capitol now. She has been there all day. And our Yamiche Alcindor is at the White House. Lisa, we've been watching the debate resume in the United States Senate tonight over whether or not the electoral votes should be counted from the state of Arizona. But much of the discussion has turned back to the events of this day. We've had several senators say they will no longer object to the formal counting of the votes. They will allow the certification to go forward because of what happened today.
That's right. Senator Kelly Loeffler, who had really the worst political day of her career, her short career in the U.S. Congress, had perhaps one of her most notable moments when she said she will no longer object to the Georgia recount or the Georgia counting because of what happened today. And I think the entire tone of this debate, which this is the debate about the presidency and the electoral count, this is when we thought was going to be about the claims of fraudulent voting, all of that. No, instead, this is really about the soul of America and about where we are, why we are here, and senators searching how to get past it. I think we will be having this moment for a long time. And I think the House is about to come into session. My TV is on full blast, excuse me.
The chair will address the chamber.
Yeah, we are watching at the same time. The Senate has been in session, the House just now coming back into session. Perhaps we want to dip into that for just a moment, Lisa, and then we'll come back to you.
To validate the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. For that reason, Congress has returned to the Capitol. We always knew that this responsibility would take us into the night and will stay as long as it takes. Our purpose will be accomplished. We must and we will show to the country and indeed to the world that we will not be diverted from our duty, that we will respect our responsibility to the Constitution and to the American people. On Sunday, it was my great honor to be sworn in as Speaker and to preside over a sacred ritual of renewal as we gathered under this dome of this temple of democracy to open the 117th Congress. I said that as we were sworn in then, we accept a responsibility as daunting and demanding as any previous generation of leadership has ever faced. We know that we're in difficult times, but little could we have imagined the assault that was made on our democracy today. To those who strove to deter us from our responsibility, you have failed. To those who engaged in the gleeful desecration of this, our temple of democracy, American democracy, justice will be done. Today, January 6th, is the Feast of the Epiphany. On this day of revelation, let us pray that this instigation to violence will provide an epiphany for our country to heal. In that spirit of healing, I evoke the song of St. Francis. I usually do. St. Francis is the patron saint of my city of San Francisco, and his song of St. Francis is our anthem. Lord, make me a channel of thy peace. Where there is darkness, may I bring light. Where there is hatred, let us bring love. Where there is despair, let us bring hope. We know that we would be part of history in a positive way today, every 4 years, when we demonstrate again the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next. And despite the shameful actions of today, we still will do so. We will be part of a history that shows the world what America is made of. That this assault is just that. It shows the weakness of those who had to show through violence what their message was. My colleagues, it's time to move on. I wear this pin quite frequently. Actually, I gave it to our beloved John Lewis just a weekend or so before he left us. And it's a flag of our country, a flag of the United States of America. On it, it says, one country, one destiny. One country, one destiny, written on the flag. That was also what was embroidered in Abraham Lincoln's coat that he had on that fateful night. Lincoln's party, Lincoln's message, one country, one destiny. So on this holy day of Epiphany, let us pray. I'm a big believer in prayer. Let us pray that there will be peace on earth and that it will begin with us. Let us pray that God will continue to bless America. And with that, let us proceed with our responsibilities to the Constitution, to which we have just within 72 hours taken the oath to uphold. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the objection.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, it is a sad day.
We are watching both chambers of the United States Congress, the House, you see on the left, where Steny Hoyer, who is the number 2 leader in the House, the majority leader in the House, and on the right, we're watching the Senate chamber. In both houses, they are debating the objection that was put forward many hours ago, earlier today, to the calling, to the counting of the votes, electoral votes from the state of Arizona. We're watching this go forward. We are waiting to see whether there will be further objections to other states or whether this is the end of it, given the violence, the assault on the U.S. Capitol today, the death of a woman who apparently was one of the protesters, just the extraordinary chain of events that unfolded that led to both chambers having to adjourn. Let's turn now for this moment to retired Navy Admiral Mike Mullen. He's the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Admiral Mullen, thank you so much for talking with us, and a terrible set of circumstances under which to have a conversation. But as you watch today's events unfold, you've served in Washington for a number of years. You were appointed by a Republican president to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs. You continue to serve under a Democratic president from George Bush, George W. Bush, to Barack Obama. What do you make of where we are right now in this country?
Well, we're in a place that I never imagined we could be, Judy. When you hear the air filled with words like traitor, sedition, insurrection, it's just one of those things I could not have imagined that we'd be here, but we are here. And where I think we are is we're very close, or we came very close to the brink today. And we need to, in my view, we need to recognize how close we are. Not say that this is something that can be immediately repaired, not say that this wasn't every bit as bad as anything I've seen in my entire life with respect to our democracy. And we need to act accordingly. And we need to react and act accordingly to protect our democracy. We oftentimes talk about this, sometimes maybe even in the abstract, that it's fragile. I think today showed how fragile it can be. And it is really important for leaders across the country to stand up now, as many have spoken tonight as I've listened to the chambers, and support the Constitution and make sure that in that support, we can move forward with the duly elected president-elect as tabulated over and over throughout the country in terms of election results, and do it in a way that starts to heal.
What do you mean react accordingly? What do you think should be done right now? I mean, I hear you saying move forward with the counting of these electoral votes. Are you saying the Congress there should be no more objections put forward?
Well, I certainly would like to see there be no objections at this point. I think it was characterized as a futile effort up front that wasn't going anywhere. And certainly, if today's events meant anything, we should, withdraw from those positions in light of what's happened to support what we need to do in the future. I honestly, Judy, reacted when I watched sort of the totality of it, and quite frankly, the leadership of our commander-in-chief, the president, who from my perspective incited this, stayed with it. And one of the first thoughts I had many hours ago now was the 25th Amendment. And I know that's been discussed in terms of how do we get from here to January 20th, because there's still 14 more days. And as I've thought about this in recent days, Judy, it's hard for me to get my head into how to think about this, but I've actually thought about how dictators act and how they pull, in countries that I have seen all over the world, how they pull the levers of their government to keep themselves in power. And I worry that that will continue, with this president until he no longer is in power, because I think he's obviously desperate, and he is doing everything he can to hold on to that power, even to the point of what I consider to be grossly illegal actions today.
Well, we know there's discussion of the 25th Amendment. There's some reporting tonight that some cabinet members, I believe CBS News has reported some cabinet members have been discussing invoking the 25th Amendment, which would call for the removal of the president for a variety of reasons. Do you think this president is a danger to the country and should be removed before, as soon as possible?
Well, it's certainly not for me to decide. I certainly think, based on the behavior recently, but really culminated today, which resulted in that mob action, and very sadly, someone losing their life, is an indication that he's not in a position to lead over the next 14 days. The decision to do that obviously rests, within the cabinet, and obviously with the vice president.
Well, those are all individuals who've been very loyal to him, and as you know very well, there's been a great deal of turnover, especially at the place you know very well, the Pentagon. They've been through a succession of secretaries of defense there. We've had the president, though, attacking his own vice president today. I mean, you know this city pretty well. Do you see the forces? Do you see the potential for the forces to come together to invoke the 25th Amendment and to remove him by one method or another?
I think certainly, as I said earlier, I think we're very close to the brink, and that we're at a place where that discussion is really, really important. And I take your point. He's got nothing but loyalists around him. I would hope, as I have seen now in both chambers, some of those who've been loyal in the past seem to be distancing themselves from the president. And I would hope that those who are closest to him would recognize the potential catastrophe that faces us even over the next 14 days after this, because I don't think we're done. I don't think today was it. And I think we need to act in a preventative way to make sure that nothing else happens. And if that means the 25th, if that means invoke the 25th, then I would hope that they would do that.
Well, we are certainly watching to see on that front, but we're also watching on the international front. There have been tensions, rising tensions between the United States and Iran. There was a comment yesterday by the individual who oversees the nuclear weapons program, who was saying if President Trump ordered him to use nuclear weapons or conventional weapons against Iran, he would feel that he needed to do so if he thought it were a legal order. I mean, there are all sorts of questions being raised right now about that. Admiral Mullen, I'm going to ask you to hold on for just a moment, because on the floor of the Senate right now is Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, who's been one of the leaders of those objecting to the electoral count. Let's listen.
Put into place so that there would be, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, no appeal from ballots to bullets, which is what we saw, unfortunately, attempted tonight. There is no place for that in the United States of America. And that's why I submit to my colleagues that what we're doing here tonight is actually very important. Because for those who have concerns about the integrity of our elections, those who have concerns about what happened in November, this is the appropriate means. This is the lawful place where those objections and concerns should be heard. This is the forum that the law provides for, our laws provide for those concerns to be registered, not through violence, not by appealing from ballots to bullets, but here in this lawful process. And so to those who say that this is just a formality today, an antique ceremony that we've engaged in for a couple of hundred years, I can't say that I agree. I can't say that our precedents suggest that. I actually think it's very vital what we do. The opportunity to be heard, to register objections is very vital, because this is the place where those objections are to be heard and dealt with, debated, and finally resolved in this lawful means, peacefully, without violence, without attacks, without bullets. And so, Mr. President, let me just say now briefly, in lieu of speaking about it later, a word about Pennsylvania, which is a state that I have been focused on, objected to, as an example of why people are concerned, millions of Americans concerned about our election integrity. The state of Pennsylvania, quite apart from allegations of any fraud, you have a state constitution that has been interpreted for over a century to say that there is no mail-in balloting permitted except for in very narrow circumstances that's also provided for in the law. And yet, last year, Pennsylvania elected officials passed a whole new law that allows universal mail-in balloting, and did it irregardless of what the Pennsylvania Constitution said. And then when Pennsylvania citizens tried to go and be heard on this subject before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they were dismissed on grounds of procedure, timeliness, in violation of that Supreme Court's own precedent. So the merits of the case have never been heard. The constitutionality of the statute actually has never been defended. I'm not aware of any court that has passed on its constitutionality. Actually, I'm not aware of anybody who's defended the constitutionality. And this was the statute that governed this last election, in which there are over 2.5 million mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. This is my point, that this is the forum. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court hasn't heard the case. There's no other court to go to hear the case in the state. And so this is the appropriate place for these concerns to be raised, which is why I have raised them here today. And I hope that this body will not miss the opportunity to take affirmative action to address the concerns of so many millions of Americans, to say to millions of Americans tonight that violence is never warranted, that violence will not be tolerated, that those who engage in it will be prosecuted, but that this body will act to address the concerns of all Americans across the country. We do need an investigation into irregularities, fraud. We do need a way forward together. We need election security reforms. I bet my friends on the other side of the aisle don't disagree with that. We need to find a way to move forward on that together so that the American people from both parties, all walks of life, can have confidence in their elections and that we can arrange ourselves under the rule of law that we share together. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Democratic leader.
We've just been listening to Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, who has been one of the chief Republican members of the Senate objecting to the counting, the formal counting of the electoral votes, which is a process that the Senate and the House together are supposed to take care of on this date, on January the 6th. When he brought up, this is the period when the House and Senate are supposed to be debating objections in Arizona. So the fact that Senator Hawley went ahead and brought up Pennsylvania, which is the state he was later reported to be planning to object to, he said he was going to object to, may indicate that he is going to drop that objection later. We're reading some tea leaves here, but the fact that he would bring that up now and say it's something that Congress needs to look at, how Pennsylvania dealt with its mail-in balloting legal changes, may be a hint that he is not going to object when it comes to Pennsylvania. We have yet to hear from Ted Cruz about tonight, about the debate on Arizona, but if Kelly Loeffler has dropped her objection on Georgia, and if Hawley is dropping his on Pennsylvania, we may have no more states that you have agreement between the Senate and the House to object to. That could mean that the process will move through smoothly now. I want to turn quickly back to Admiral Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs. My apologies again for interrupting our conversation. We did want to hear what Senator Hawley had to say because of his role in all this. And as we say, we're trying to understand what that means. But I was about to ask you about international concerns. You were raising questions about any danger posed by President Trump for the remaining 14 days that he's in office. And I think it's fair to say that extends to what he might do on a global front.
Well, I think that concern, and specifically, Judy, I know you asked about Iran, and that's been a country in the forefront with respect to this administration in terms of focus. And in some ways, that's just fine because Iran is still a country it's led by a very bad group of people, and they still espouse the kind of both rhetoric, and they are developing systems which are very, very dangerous. I was encouraged the other day when the Nimitz was turned around, and it seemed to settle things, and things seemed to be quieter than they were as Nimitz was pulling out just a few days ago. But I know this has been an area that the president and his administration is focused on. It is, I continue to believe, a very dangerous time with respect to that. And I'm just hopeful that the totality of those individuals around the president can convince him to restrain himself at this particular point in time with respect to taking any action which could spin out of control in that part of the world. I think as far as the globe is concerned, that's probably the hottest point right now, but it is worthy of continued watch and concern, and certainly something that when President-elect Biden gets in, he's going to have to address very quickly and very, very pointedly, because Iran will continue to present a challenge.
Sobering words from the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen. Admiral Mullen, very good to see you again, and thank you so much for talking with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Judy. It's always good to be with you.
And we are watching Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania on the floor of the House, Democratic senator. We are told that over in the House, the Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, is on the floor. Is that right? Is McCarthy still on the floor? If so, we should listen to what he has to say.
Thank you for this round of praise. Looking back on the past few hours, it is clear this Congress will not be the same after today. And I hope it will be the better. I hope not just this institution, but I hope every American pauses for that moment and thinks among themselves that we can disagree with one another but not dislike each other. We can respect the voices of others. There's many times we debate on this body, and we should. There's many times we can get heated. I still consider Steny Hoyer a very good friend. There's times I get upset. I'll call him at home to express what things I may not see fair or just. But that's the way we should handle things. The majority leader is right. We are all Americans first. But should we also think for a moment, what do we put on social media? What do we convey to one another? Just because you have a personal opinion different than mine, you have a right to say it, but nobody has a right to become a mob. And we all should stand united in condemning the mob together. Yeah. We solve problems before our nation not through destruction, but through debate. That is the heart of this democracy. I know what we debate today is tough, but it's just, it's right. This isn't the first side of the aisle that's ever debated this issue. I thought what Madam Speaker said back in 2005, this is democracy at its best, when they talked about a presidential election in Ohio. These are the moments that we should raise the issue about integrity and accountability and accuracy in our elections. But you know what we should do, the next difference? Not just raise the issue, but work together to solve the problems. Now is the moment. Now is the moment to show America we can work best together. I will tell you, the size of the majority is slim, so it gives us the opportunity to make that happen. The only thing that can hold us back is the will of one another to do it. This side of the aisle always believes in working with anybody who wants to move it forward. That does not mean that we're going to agree 100% of the time. That does not mean our voice cannot be heard. That does not mean we cannot be treated fairly. We should be. That may mean on the size of committees. That means on our ability to offer an amendment. It means on our ability to have our voice. But at the end of the day, it helps us come to a better conclusion. By returning here to complete the work we were sent to do, we are proving that our democracy cannot be disrupted by criminal behavior. We will not falter, we will not bend, and we will not shrink from our duty. Let me be very clear. Mobs don't rule America. Laws rule America. It was true when our cities were burning this summer, and it's true now. When When Americans go to bed tonight, their lasting memory should not be a Congress overrun by rioters. It must be a resolute Congress conducting healthy debate. We may not disagree on a lot in America, but tonight we must show the world that we will respectfully but thoroughly carry out the most basic duties of democracy. We will continue with the task that we have been sent here to do. We will follow the Constitution and the law and the process for hearing valid concerns about election integrity. We'll do it with respect. We will respect your opinion. We'll respect what you say, and we're willing to listen to it. I think the nation will be better for it on both sides of the aisle. Let's show the country the mob did not win. We have a job to do it. Let's do it with pride, and let's be better when the sun rises tomorrow. With that, I yield back, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the objection.
We've been listening to the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California, of course, the leading Republican in the House, speak about the events of today, saying mobs don't rule America, laws rule America. But then he did go on to say we want to continue tonight to do our job through the which the Constitution calls on us to do, saying we need to continue to hear these objections to the counting of the electoral votes. So we'll see where that goes, whether he means there will be debate on those objections or not. Just moments ago, and perhaps he still is, the senator from Utah, Mitt Romney, has been speaking on the floor of the Senate. At one point, he accused President Trump of being complicit in the events of today when the mob took over the Capitol, assaulted the Capitol. A woman was killed in the aftermath of that. We're going to try to bring you Senator Romney's remarks. Notable in particular because of Senator Romney was shouted at an airport as he took off to come to Washington yesterday, and on the plane, the people shouting at him called him a traitor. So I think we now have most of Senator Mitt Romney's remarks. Let's go to that.
No congressional audit is ever going to convince these voters, particularly when the president will continue to say that the election was stolen. The best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth. That's the burden. That's the duty of leadership. The truth is that President-elect Biden won the election. President Trump lost. I've had that experience myself. It's no fun. Scores of courts, the president's own attorney general, state election officials, both Republican and Democrat, have reached that unequivocal decision. And in light of today's sad circumstances, I asked my colleague, do we weigh our own political fortunes more heavily than we weigh the strength of our republic, the strength of our democracy, and the cause of freedom? What's the weight of personal acclaim compared to the weight of conscience? Leader McConnell said that the vote today is the most important in his 36 years of public service. Think of that. Authorizing 2 wars, voting on 2 impeachments. He said that not because the vote reveals something about the election, it's because this vote reveals something about us. I urge my colleagues to move forward with completing the electoral count, to refrain from further objections, and to unanimously affirm the legitimacy of the presidential election. Thank you, Mr. President.
That was Senator Mitt Romney, who has been one of the very first Republicans to renounce what President Trump has been trying to do and insisting the election was rigged and that he was robbed of this election that he actually won. Senator Romney's been saying almost from the beginning, he was one of the very first senators, Republican members of Congress, to congratulate Joe Biden on his victory. He has stuck to that position. He's been, a lone figure in the Republican Party for many, many weeks until now. There are more Republicans joining him in this. A few moments ago, you didn't hear it just then, but a few moments ago, Senator Romney said that President Trump is complicit in the tragic and violent events of today, the assault on the U.S. Capitol. Our Yamiche Alcindor is at the White House. Yamiche, you've been there all day and all night. We're into the night. Some interesting developments taking place around people who work in the administration of this president, but are questioning their role in it any longer.
That's right, Judy. We saw Vice President Pence reach his limit today when he said that he would not disrupt the count of the Congress. And now what we're seeing tonight is a number of White House officials looking at the violence that is the consequence of President Trump's false accusations, false claims of voter fraud, and saying that they can no longer work here. So the people that we've now seen leave are Stephanie Grisham. She is the First Lady's chief of staff. She was a longtime aide for President Trump. She worked on the president's presidential campaign all the way back in 2015. We also saw the White House social secretary resign. Also, White House Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Matthews is gone. And there are some reports, we haven't confirmed all of them, but there are some reports that possibly the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, he is thinking of leaving as well as his deputy. There are also reports that Elaine Chao, the Transportation Secretary, and I should say wife of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who delivered a blistering speech against President Trump's rhetoric and his claims, she is also possibly thinking about leaving. And what we see really is a White House that is now bleeding staffers, that is filled with people who have looked at President Trump's actions today, and I should say his inaction, his inability to come before cameras to really have a robust response to this, and say they can no longer work at this White House. And I should also note that as all of this is happening, you're now seeing social media companies trying to limit the communication of President Trump. Twitter has said that they're going to lock his account for 12 hours and possibly permanently ban him because he's continuing to spread disinformation. Facebook has also said that he will not be able to post for 24 hours. He's also being locked out of Instagram. So all of the ways that President Trump has communicated to the American people without going through the media are now being taken away from him because these companies, much like White House staffers, are saying the president has gone too far.
And Yamiche, there's also been conversation about the cabinet, the president's cabinet, having conversations about invoking the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, which, of course, allows for the removal of the president. What are you hearing? What kind of reporting are you hearing about that? There was a report earlier today that that there were groups urging Vice President Pence to have those conversations with cabinet members. We know tonight the vice president is at the Capitol presiding over the Senate as they carry on these debates.
That's right. I've talked to some White House officials who say that there's early discussions of the 25th Amendment, mainly because people are wondering whether or not President Trump can go on for 14 days. But there hasn't been anything formally presented to Vice President Pence. And my understanding is that there are people in this White House close to the president who feel like, Judy, he's quote unquote lost it. There are people who are telling me that he is living in a reality created of his own doing, and he's surrounded himself with people who are loyal and who are not challenging him. Someone also told me today, Judy, that the president wants to hold on to power by any means necessary, meaning that it doesn't matter to him that there are windows being broken at the U.S. Capitol, that there are people being shot in the Capitol, the headquarters of the Congress, that the president is more concerned about holding on to those people who have come to the Capitol, holding on to his supporters, than he is making sure that the government of the United States, the headquarters in D.C., that we are all safe in this city. So what we see from the president here is someone who is focused solely on staying in power, solely on his own political fortunes. And there are people around him, people that have stuck with him through all sorts of chaos, who are finally, I think, getting to the point where they are genuinely scared. I can tell you, Judy, I've not heard people around the president sound as concerned as they have sounded today. And that's saying a lot because we've lived through all sorts of things with this president.
I don't even know what to say in response to what you just said, Yamiche. I mean, that it's astonishing, at the very least, that there are people saying the president would do anything to hold on to power. I mean, we think of dictatorships, countries around the world that don't have anything close to a democracy. They don't count votes. Where their leaders just stay in power as long as they feel like it, whether it's Russia, or I could name any number of countries where the person in power in no way answers to the people of that country. And to hear you say that there are people around the President of the United States who believe that he would do anything to stay in power is truly alarming.
It is alarming, Judy. And there are people
made mention of the fact that she is hearing that the president has lost it. We know thus far that a woman has been killed, one of the protesters, that members of Congress are now calling them not so much protesters as rioters. I have been stuck to the news all day, and I have been shocked at what I've seen. On the one hand, I'm like, I knew something bad was going to happen, but I'm going to be honest, I thought it would be inauguration day. I wasn't thinking it was going to be today with this electoral college count. And at the beginning of the day, well, Vice President Pence has been pretty close to President Trump. And today, when he made the remarks that, he didn't have the power that the president was calling for him to act upon, it was at that point that I said, wonder what's really going down. I kind of wondered. But I certainly did not envision these rioters breaching the Capitol steps and getting in to the state capitol. These are steps that, I have walked upon time and time again during my lifetime. And, to get into the state capitol, take some protocol. You're not just going to, just barge up in there, bogard your way in. There's a process. And since 9/11, there's really been a process but you conduct yourself in Congress as you would in a courtroom or some other place of decorum. This is not a place that you would be brandishing, Trump supporter flags, or that you would be brandishing the Confederate flag, or even your state flag. They expect that you have an appointment, or you're participating in a tour. It's not a situation where it's the people's house, yes, but it's a people's public house, and you go there with a purpose, and the purpose is business, and the business is conducted in a very civilized manner. So, I've been a protester most of my life since I wasn't even 20 years old yet, I don't think. I think I was maybe 19 years old. And my first big protest was at Southern University with Students United. And the National Guard, I heard earlier people saying, oh, we're the National Guard, the National Guard. Well, my view of the National Guard was as an unarmed student at Southern University, and two of my fellow schoolmates were gunned down in front of the administration building. The sheriff's deputies who gunned them down got a chance to live out their lives without being revealed who they were. They got their pension and went on about their lives. The National Guard, who took over the administration building, painted KKK on the walls and the N-word on the walls, and since then they tore that building down. So I wasn't saying where's the National Guard when it comes to a bunch of white protesters just out of control. They not in front of no mic, saying the administration is unfair or this is unfair. They breaking up windows, climbing into place, armed. Somebody done thrown a pipe bomb somewhere under the desk somewhere. No, I wasn't saying where's the National Guard. We've had James Pugh, a strategic thinking teacher, over in the lobby, and I'm trying to see if we can get him on. And maybe we have lost him. James, if you want to try to reconnect, we'll put you on and get your point of view. Until then, let's go back to PBS, which is one of the news sources that I really trust. And let's see what they are reporting on the joint congressional hearings that are taking place. They have reconvened. You understand that they have, one woman has died.
I'm starting to see hopes for a horizon for when this very long day ends. Of course, we still need to confirm that there will be no further objections. My reading is that is the mood of these two chambers. That is what I'm getting from these remarks. These are not sharp protests of the election. If anything, I feel like the objectors are kind of checking a box to say that they did this.
Yeah, but they're still gutless wonders. The Republicans.
And that's the question I had, because as you point out, Kelly Loeffler has now said she's withdrawing her objection given what happened today. She made it fairly brief, but it was a very clear statement that she's no longer going to pursue this.
They hear things differently than I do.
It was a little more difficult to discern, but it was noticed that he made a point of bringing up Pennsylvania, the fact that the state changed its law around mail-in voting after years and years of saying mail-in voting, very strict rules around mail-in voting. They made it much easier this year due to the pandemic. And he said this is something we need to look at as a body.
I thought that was a smoke screen. I heard
that. We can come together and look at that, which sounded to me as if he was saying, I'm dealing with that now. Perhaps he was saying, I won't be bringing up the formal objection.
There's no reason he would be doing it twice. In this circumstance, with this kind of a problem, a historic crisis at the U.S. Capitol, it feels to me unlikely that he would do that twice. And he has put out statements condemning the violence today in very strong words. So I just feel that's where we're headed. We have to see. One other thing, Judy, you're talking to your nation, great reporting on what's going on at the White House, which is also eye-popping. Here, there are the beginnings of conversations. I've had a few sources contact me saying they're trying to weigh this concept of whether the president should be removed now, whether by the 25th Amendment is cabinet or some other effort. Impeachment seems like that is unlikely for timing reasons. But there is some back and forth thinking of whether a removal of this president now, and I can't believe I'm talking about this, but whether removal of this president could actually inflame things at this moment, that it could actually feed into his ideas and the ideas of people who came to this Capitol that are erroneous, that there's a plot against this president. Now, I don't think these conversations are settled, but I think that's something that is under discussion right now. And of course, Congress does not have power over the 25th Amendment removal. That is up to the cabinet. However, many members here are in touch with those cabinet secretaries. So I think there is what's happening is there is
That's a good question.
All of Washington is kind of thinking through these issues together quietly, and for now, I don't know how slowly it'll go. It feels like it's moving quickly, but it could slow down again.
That's a very good question. Is the president
conversation around that, and as you mentioned, the closeness between the Capitol and the members of the President's cabinet, no closer relationship, I think it's fair to say, than the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who's married to a member of the Trump cabinet, Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Labor.
That's a good question. You know, is the president a problem with national security? Because he still won't stop.
Pandemic to get the economy going again, to face challenging issues of racial and social justice. I hope we will learn from what happened today, the mob attack on this Capitol, the price we pay when we don't stand up for the truth and for democracy. James McHenry, Maryland's delegate to the Constitutional Convention, wrote about a famous exchange in his diary between Elizabeth, Willie Powell, and Benjamin Franklin. Wrote a lady asked Dr. Franklin, well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? A republic. A republic, replied Dr. Franklin, if you can keep it. My colleagues, this is a test of whether we're united to keep our republic. I hope we will pass the test together. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
That's a good question. Can we keep the republic together?
Senator from South Carolina.
Or has it gone too far?
Many times
with the haters,
the problem.
I love it.
the fringe conspiracy theorists. Oh, now I'm very interested. What does he have to say?
Tim and I a good relationship. I love Tim Scott. 1876.
He part of the problem as far as I could see.
Louisiana and Florida sent two slate of electors. They had two governments, by the way.
And we didn't know what to do. Why did South Carolina, Florida, and
Louisiana do it?
To hold the country hostage. To end Reconstruction.
It worked.
The commission was 8 to 7. It didn't work. Nobody accepted it. The way it ended is when Hayes did a deal with these three states. You give me the electors, I'll kick the Union Army out. The rest is history. It led to Jim Crow. If you're looking for historical guidance, this is not the one to pick. If you're looking for a way to convince people there was no fraud, having a commission chosen by Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, and John Roberts is not going to get you to where you want to go. It ain't going to work. So it's not going to do any good. It's going to delay. It gives credibility to a dark chapter of our history. That's why I'm not with you. But I will fight to my death for you. You're able to object. You're not doing anything wrong. Other people have objected. Let's think it's a uniquely bad idea to delay this election. Trump and I. We've had a hell of a journey. I hate it then. Oh my God, I hate it. From my point of view, he's been a consequential president. But today,
First thing you'll see.
First thing you'll see.
All I can say.
All I can say
is count me out.
Count me out. Enough is enough.
I've tried to be helpful.
I've tried to be helpful.
But when this
Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled 4-3
that they didn't violate
the Constitution of Wisconsin.
I agree with the 3, but I
agree with the 3, but I accept the 4. If Al Gore can accept 5-4, he's not president. I can accept Wisconsin 4-3.
Pennsylvania.
It went to the Second Circuit. So much for all the judges being in Trump's pocket.
They said, no, you're wrong.
They said, no, you're wrong. I accept the Pennsylvania Second Circuit that Trump's lawsuit wasn't right. Georgia, they said the Secretary of State took the law in his own hands and changed the election laws unlawfully.
The federal judge said no.
The federal judge said no. I accept the federal judge even though I don't agree with it. Fraud.
They said there's
66,000 people in Georgia under 18 voted. How many people believe that?
I asked, give me 10.
I asked, give me 10. And had one.
They said 8,000 felons.
They said 8,000 felons in prison in Arizona voted. Give me 10. Hadn't gotten one.
Does that say there's problems in every election?
There's problems in every election.
I don't buy this.
I don't buy this. Enough's enough.
We got to end it.
We got to end it.
Vice President Pence.
Wow.
Vice President Pence.
What they're asking you to do, you won't do because you can't. Talk about interesting times. I associate myself with Rand Paul.
How many times will you hear that?
The mob has done something
nobody else could do.
To get men Rand to agree.
To get men Rand to agree. Rand is right.
If you're a conservative, this is the most offensive concept
in the world that a single person could disenfranchise 155 million people.
The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House, open all certificates, and the vote shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be president. Where in there does it say Mike can say, I don't like the results? I want to send them back to the states. I believe there was fraud. To the conservatives who believe in the Constitution, now's your chance to stand up and be counted. Originalism, count me in.
Originalism, count me in.
It means what it says.
It means what it says.
So, Mike,
Vice President. Mr. Vice President.
Just hang in there.
Just hang in there.
They said we can count on Mike.
They said we can count on Mike. All of us can count on the Vice President.
You're going to do the right thing. You're going to do the right thing.
You're going to do the constitutional thing. You got a son who flies F-35s. You got a son-in-law who flies F-18s. They're out there flying so that we can get it right here.
There are people dying.
There are people dying.
My good friend from Illinois. To make sure we have a chance to argue among ourselves. And when it's over, it is over.
And when it's over, it is over. It is over.
Final thing. Joe Biden.
Final thing. Joe Biden. I've traveled the world with Joe. I hope he lost. I prayed he would lose. He won.
He's a legitimate president of the United States.
Hallelujah. You said it.
I cannot convince people. Certain groups.
By my words, but I will tell you by my actions. That maybe I, above all others in this body, need to say this. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are lawfully elected and will become the president and the vice president of the United States on January the 20th.
Well done. I'm shocked.
Majority Leader, Mr. President, I yield back the balance of our time.
All time has expired.
All time has expired.
Question is, shall the objection
By the gentleman from Arizona,
Mr. Gosar, and the Senator from Texas, Mr. Cruz, and others,
be sustained.
Is there a second?
Is there a second?
I ain't hear it.
There is.
There is.
Clerk will call the roll.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Roll call.
Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso.
Mr. Bennett.
Mr. Bennett.
Mrs. Blackburn.
Mrs. Blackburn.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Mr. Blunt.
Mr. Blunt.
Mr. Booker.
Mr. Booker.
Mr. Bozeman.
Mr. Bozeman.
Mr. Braun.
Mr. Braun.
Mr.
Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown.
Mr. Burr.
Mr. Burr.
Miss Cantwell.
Ms. Cantwell.
Mrs. Capito.
Mrs. Capito.
Mr. Cardin.
Mr. Cardin.
Mr. Carper.
Mr. Carper.
Mr. Casey.
Mr. Casey. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst.
We are listening to a vote on the objection that was raised by Senator Cruz and House members to counting the electoral vote from the state of Arizona. So far, the only no that I've heard, or yes, I should say, the only yes I've heard to sustaining this objection is Senator Cruz himself. Other Republican senators who came into this process supporting the idea of objection, including Senator Braun and others, so far have said no, that they would not support the objection. But let's continue to listen.
Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono. No. Mr. Hoeven. I got excited. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Inhofe. No. Mr. Johnson. No. Mr. Kane. No. Mr. Kelly. No. Mr. Kennedy. Aye. Mr. King. No. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Lankford. Mr. Leahy. No. Mr. Lee. No. Mrs. Loeffler. No. Mr. Lujan. No. Ms. Lummis. No. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Markey. No. Mr. Marshall. Aye. Mr. McConnell. No. Mr. Menendez. No. Mr. Merkley. No. Mr. Moran. No. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. No. Mrs. Murray. No. Mr. Paul. No. Mr. Peters. No. Mr. Portman. No. Mr. Reed. No. Mr. Risch. No. Mr. Romney. Ms. Rosen. No. Mr. Rounds. No. Mr. Rubio. No. Mr. Sanders. No. Mr. Sass. No. Mr. Schatz. No. Mr. Schumer. No. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. No. Mrs. Shaheen. No. Mr. Shelby.
Ms. Sinema. Ms. Smith. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young.
They are counting the votes in the Senate on the objection to accepting the vote count, the electoral vote count from the state of Arizona. We're about to hear
the call of the chair. There
clearly was a majority against accepting
the objection.
But
let's hear what the numbers
let's
are.
hear what the numbers are.
I'm very interested.
The senators we
heard who
accept the objection are some of the original group of objectors that they include
Senator
Cruz of Texas,
Hyde Smith,
Cruz,
Mississippi, Senator Kennedy of Louisiana, Senator Marshall of Kansas,
Senator Tuberville of Alabama, Senator Hawley of Missouri. It may be only those six, but we'll see. Not sure about Senator Lankford. I couldn't vote for him. I couldn't hear his vote.
Question.
So many of us have now.
It should have been unanimous to accept the votes of Arizona.
Will there be objections to the votes
in other states, electoral votes? If there are, will that lead to an extended
debate?
We're seeing a report that Senator Hawley of Missouri will object to Pennsylvania, but there will not be the drawn out debate that we are seeing now, 2 hours for each chamber. But we will see.
We're going to take a little break. We'll be right back. Let's talk.
Looks as if they're checking on some of the votes here.
And in your comments, you can thumbs up
the total
or use any of the icons you have at your disposal to
unusual.
Let us know what you're thinking. It's been a long day.
Day in the Congress.
And we'll be back in just a bit.
10 o'clock at night Eastern time.
The Congress is back in session, carrying out what they started to do early this afternoon when they went into session to begin to formally count the